It's a lesson on classifying quadrilaterals, and what I first have here is what we call a Venn diagram. And let me start by defining what a quadrilateral is. It's a four-sided polygon, and just so that we know what a polygon is, a polygon is a closed plane figure formed by three or more line segments that intersect only at the endpoints, at their endpoints. So examples would be triangles, quadrilaterals, pentagons, octagons, decagons, and so on. We're focused on quadrilaterals here, and when we're trying to classify them, let's first realize that the kind of big piece of terminology is quadrilaterals. That's our umbrella terminology. All of these other names will fall into the classification of quadrilaterals because they're inside this big blue circle. A kite is a type of quadrilateral that I'll show you shortly. And then you have trapezoids, and then you have parallelograms, and there's several types of parallelograms, several types of specific parallelograms, rectangles, squares, and rhombuses. And you'll notice that rectangles and rhombuses overlap when they are squares. So a rhombus is a rectangle when it's a square, and a rectangle is a rhombus when it's a square. So we'll clarify that momentarily. So what I first have is just a generic quadrilateral. It's not a parallelogram. This particular one is not a parallelogram. It's just a four-sided polygon. None of the sides. It's basically a scalene quadrilateral. None of the side lengths are the same. None of the angles are the same. So the best we could name that is a quadrilateral. But now getting more specific, a parallelogram, you'll notice has two pairs of parallel sides. There's this side and this side, and this side length, and this side length, and these opposite sides are also congruent. They're parallel and they're congruent, and notice they have two sets of congruent angles. So a definition of a parallelogram is a quadrilateral with two pairs of parallel sides. Next I have a rectangle, and a rectangle certainly looks like, if I showed this to a kindergartner, I think that most kindergartners would recognize this is a rectangle, but very specifically, a rectangle is a type of parallelogram that has four right angles. So that's how we're going to define that here. It's a parallelogram with four right angles. A square is actually a type of parallelogram. It's also a parallelogram, but it's a rectangle. But we could describe it more specifically. It's a rectangle because it meets the definition of a rectangle. It's a parallelogram with four right angles, but also it has four congruent sides. So the way we'll define that is a square is a rectangle with four congruent sides. Let's look down at a rhombus. Now, a rhombus has four congruent sides. It's also a parallelogram, so this side is parallel to this side, and this side is parallel to this side. So a rhombus is going to be a parallelogram with four congruent sides. So that's how we'll define it. And again, let me repeat that a rhombus is a rectangle when it's a square. So a square is a rhombus, and a square is also a rectangle. A square is always a rectangle and always a rhombus. One of the reasons why I'm saying that is the homework for this lesson is they're all in the form of always, sometimes, never lessons. Always, sometimes, never questions. Now, a kite is not a parallelogram. That's why that was not in that circle that contained parallelograms. It is actually a quadrilateral that has two pairs of adjacent sides congruent. So this side length and this side length are congruent, and this side length and this side length are congruent. And that's what makes a kite. It has two congruent angles where the two pairs of adjacent sides meet the other pair of adjacent sides. So it has two congruent angles, but these two angles must be different, otherwise it would be a parallelogram if they were the same. So a kite is a quadrilateral with two pairs of adjacent congruent sides. And then lastly, we're going to learn about trapezoids. A trapezoid is a quadrilateral that has exactly one pair of parallel sides. And so that's how we'll define that, a quadrilateral with exactly one pair of parallel sides. If this side is parallel to this side, then you no longer have a trapezoid. It has exactly one pair of parallel sides. When you have the non-parallel sides being congruent, you have what's called an isosceles trapezoid. And so we'll define an isosceles trapezoid as, I lost my definition here, but we're going to call an isosceles trapezoid as a trapezoid with the non-parallel sides being congruent. So I didn't get that definition written down, but that's what we'll call that. It's a trapezoid with the non-parallel sides being congruent. Notice that will create two sets of congruent angles as well. And that is the end of the lesson.